a young man by the name of Angel Garcia. And then at the end of the conversation, obviously I said, we're here to help you. Because what an amazing thing to be able to reach teenagers with the gospel of Christ.
Amen.
And so at the end, he said, I want to apologize. I said, for what? He goes, well, I've always heard such negative things about the convention. But it's not true. You guys really are here to help us. And so it was a real transformational story and really a blessing in what we do. And so anyway, thanks for the opportunity to serve in that part of the state.
Thank you. Our secretary is in the central region. How many associations are there, Jeff?
19.
14. Could be 19. 14. How many churches?
956.
956. And within about another 3 months, 4 months, how many months? October, when you say?
October.
He will have personally visited with every pastor in Central Florida.
Amen.
I mean, when we say personal relation, we mean it.
We have at this point visited with over 350 pastors, and every day I meet with 10 pastors a day. And so every day my secretary dropped 5 pastors into my phone. Every day I'm going to sit across the table or in an office with a pastor, at least 4 to 5 a day. So in every week I'm going to see either 40 or 50 pastors a week. You know, I pastored in Tampa for 22 years. So if you cut me, I believe pastors. I have a heart of a pastor. Now they keep telling me you're not pastoring, but inside I'm pastoring. It's like a little kid. The mom told me, say, son, sit down. And he stood up. So mom said, sit down, boy. He kept standing. He said, boy, I won't spank you if you don't sit down. He sat down. He said, I may be sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside. I may not be pastoring on the outside, but I'm pastoring on the inside. And so, you know, one of the things that I would say in terms of that personalization, I don't know how many pastors that I've met with in this 5-month period that have said to me, I've never had anyone from the convention visit me. I've never had anyone from the convention call on me. And you know what? When we say, it's not just a tagline that says that we're right beside you. I tell you all the time, whenever you look up, I'm going to be pulling up. I'm going to be knocking at your door. I'm going to be coming to your church. You know, one of the things that I've said, and I've said it all, is that just going through the course of my day, I'll say this real quickly. Dr. Green he's already punched the clock on me. I felt it. You know, and I was calling pastors like I normally do every day. I got a list of pastors I'm gonna call. I called this pastor and just checking on him and said, Pastor, how you doing? He said, I'm doing. I said, and he said, I'm okay. I said, well, tell me how's it working? Just want to connect with you and wanted to support, come meet with you. And he said, well, I'm no longer at my church. I said, really? I said, no. He said, no, I just left my church. I said, well, tell me what happened. He said, it became toxic. I said, oh, toxic. I'd never heard anyone refer to the church as toxic. And I knew then, God spoke to me that this was going to be more than a Big Mac and a Coke, you know, kind of a visit. And so that next day, probably next day that week, I called another pastor. He said the same thing. He said, the church had become toxic. And so I called Dr. Green. I said, Dr. Green, I've got some pastors that I think they need some extra TLC, some tender loving care. And I said, here's what I like to do with them. There's an Hispanic pastor, there's an African American pastor, there's an English pastor, and they're bleeding profusely. Now here's what I've learned. If the pastor is bleeding, his wife is hemorrhaging. If the pastor has a cold, his wife has pneumonia. Wherever he's at, she's at critical mass. And so I took those pastors and my wife, we took them to a place, a resort, and for 3 days, that Friday night, everything was just tight. Everybody was tight Friday night. You know how it is. And by that whole Friday night, it was just oxygen. I just felt like they just needed oxygen to breathe. They just needed, I wanted to help them from where they are to where they were going. By Saturday afternoon, the gloves were off. They were just bleeding. I mean, it was talking about breakthrough. To this day, that was last month. Every week, I'll get a call from one of those pastors. My wife will get a call from one of those pastors' wife. You know, just so thankful for what we were able to do, and just to release. They had been carrying stuff that was pent up. Pastors bleed, but their wives bleed in silence. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is that, it's one thing when you get a group together. The bigger the group, the less people share. The smaller the group, the more intimate they take off the glove, and they can just be real. And so when we say we're right beside you, we want to be just that.
Amen. Thank you, Jim. We may be tracking 11:55 here, okay? So, no, I'm just kidding. This is Wayne Bryant. Wayne is in the southwestern region of our state. How many associations do you have there?
We have 6.
How many churches?
About 280.
Give us a quick word.
Last October, I met a young pastor, pastor of a church that's about 4 years old, and he came to me wanting to know how he could get his $20,000. That was how the coffee started. Where do I get my money? And I smiled and I said, well, let's talk for a while. And we talked, and he came to their association annual meeting I preached at, and he came to hear me preach, and we visited together through the holidays. And first of the year, he called me and said, we need to meet again. And this young pastor, 31 years old, a man with absolutely no training, not been to college, not been to seminary, came out of a drug problem, and God just changed his heart. He came to me and he said, I've got a problem. We've outgrown our building. And I said, well, tell me about it. They started in a building that will seat about 95 people. They're still in that building running 200 in attendance. Wow. And last year baptized 48 people. And he came to me and said, we've got to have a bigger building. And I said, well, let's go look. We went in the car, and he took me by an old Christian church building, about 200 years old. It was an old building. And he said, what do you think about it? I said, let's look a little further. And he took me to another church building that Assembly of God Church had just purchased, right next door, right together. They actually share a property line. And we went in. Building seats about 300 people, and it's like brand new. I mean, the pews are new, the carpet's new, it's got new paint, just like a brand new building. He said, what do you think? I said, this is your place. Long story very short, they met with the people and were told, we're not going to rent to you. And he came to me almost in tears. He said, I don't know what to do. A week later, he called me back. He said, we have another meeting. And he went and met with them. And I think tomorrow, if I remember the date correctly, they're going to sign a lease to move into that building that seats over 300 people. They're going to do so, have full access 7 days a week, 24 hours a day to that church building, and pay $100 a month more in rent than they were paying for a building they had filled up twice every Sunday morning. Now, I told you that to tell you this. I am as excited as I've ever been about young pastors. We are very fortunate as Southern Baptists. We have some of the finest young pastors I believe we've ever had. And I'm grateful that you allow me the opportunity to walk beside them. I see guys sitting in the room that are a part of my responsibility here tonight. And I'm grateful to God that I can be right beside them and right beside 280 other churches in Southwest Florida.
Thank you. Thank you. Lewis Miller. Lewis, if you see Lewis around, the Panhandle group are like a pack. They never separate. They just kind of sit together all the time. And so, Lewis, how many associations do you have in the Northwest?
We have 14 associations.
14 associations. How many churches?
476 churches.
Give us a quick word.
There's about 1.5 million people that live in the Panhandle of Florida. And just over 50% of them are unclaimed by any church. They have no affiliation with any church. I've had the privilege of moving home when Dr. Green called and said, hey, Lewis, I want you to move to West Florida. Would you consider doing that? I said, let me pray. Yes, there we go. Yeah. It wasn't a hard decision for us because Becky and I grew up in the Panhandle of Florida, and we're excited to be home and serving with pastors who are trying to make an impact on that 1.5 million people that live in the Panhandle of Florida. I'm excited because of the relationships that God's allowing us to build. I'm developing a network of different kinds of pastors in different sort of settings and scenarios. I had a young pastor call me for a building consultation. He said, "Do you have anybody that can come talk to me about building?" And I just happened to have finished a conversation a couple of days prior with a staff member at a church that they had just completed an entire building situation at their church, and I contacted him, said, "Would you go meet with him?" He said, "I'd be honored to." I checked back with that young pastor afterwards, and he said, "Man, that was really helpful. He gave us so much good advice and things to think about before we build." So I'm excited to see some networking going on in the Panhandle. We've got a ways to go yet, but God's off to a great start. I'll conclude with my most exciting thing and most current thing going on. We've had this Saturday, in 2 days, we'll have our final Vacation Bible School clinic in Milton, Florida, at First Baptist Church in Milton. We've had 2 prior. It's the first time we've had 3 Vacation Bible School clinics regionally across this region, one in Tallahassee, one in Panama City, and now in Milton. And we had about 240 leaders attend the first 2 trainings, and so we're very excited about that. I got an email today from my ministry assistant saying that we have 90 people pre-registered to come to the meeting in Milton. So that'll give us about 340 leaders, or 330 leaders, excuse me. And if I understand Billy Young's Lifeway research number correctly, he said for every 1 leader that's trained in Vacation Bible School, 1.1 kids are born into the kingdom as a result of that ministry effort. So if I do my math right, I think that's about the potential of 363 kids across the Panhandle this summer who may be born into God's kingdom. That excites
me. Glenn has the northeast, thank you. The northeast part. And how many associations do we have in the northeast?
10.
10? How many churches?
600.
600. So you can see what are we among so many, you know? But God is multiplying that, just story by story, church by church, life by life. Glenn, give us a word about what's going on.
I'd like to know why I'm last after having to follow these other guys. But let me tell you a quick story. A church in the 50s, 1950s, was birthed. In the 1960s and 70s, it was one of the bell cow churches, one of the leading churches in Florida. The area around the church was growing. In fact, the church's name is named for 2 subdivisions. You remember when we used to do it that way? As the city was growing, transition takes place. And what took place in the 80s and 90s was the fact that the neighborhoods changed drastically from what they were to what they are today. A young pastor comes on board, and incidentally, this church has had a history of long-term pastors, very stable. A young pastor comes on board who has a relationship to the church and has trust because of the fact that he grew up in that area. And he brought that with him in leading the church to reach out and to do more than it's ever done before. And so the church has gone through some revitalization in the midst of the transition. When I took this job, one of the first bits of information I got was a proposal from this church for revitalization. As I read it, I was impressed with the thoroughness of it. I come from a business background 100 years ago, and it looked like something I'd seen in the business world. And then I met the young man at Starbucks, and the moment I started talking to him, I decided I'm going to give him the money. Don't look at me so spiritual. I usually done the same thing. Quality young man. The way he handled himself, the way he presented himself, and the way he acknowledged the challenge that was before him. And so we've given him the money. And then in the midst of that, they've decided to start another church. And they're starting a church in a difficult area of the city. You might want to meet the young man. Manny, would you and your wife, Christina, would you stand up?
Amen.
Hardwood Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida.